give you first of all a very high-level view of the model. A very simple one is a predictive model, which is why I chose David Guess model, because it's predictive in nature, so it works like a chain reaction. It has 4 components, and I always mention the last component first because it is about keeping results in mind. It's about outcomes and final outcomes. And I put emphasis always in the term extraordinary. And a lot of people ask me, well, what do you mean by that? What I mean by that is that we're looking at results and impact beyond the ordinary. We all know like what the ordinary mediocrity looks like. The first component is what we call the contract makers or the leadership promise. All leaders have a leadership promise, whether they're aware of it or not. In psychological contract terms, those are the contract makers, or what we call the nature of the deal. The second one is the leader's integrity or credibility. In psychological terms, we say this is the health of the contract or the delivery of the deal. And the third component is the impact that this contract has on the followers, which is what we call the consequences of the contract. So I'm going to get now into a little bit more detail and discuss some of the key variables of each one of these components. So as we said earlier, we got the results component, the performance, those extraordinary outcomes. But in order to get there, we need to refer back to the first component, which was the leadership promise, if you remember. And the leadership promise is also referred to as the contract makers, or the nature of the deal. What is the deal that the leaders are offering to the followers? This constitutes a number of things. First of all, it constitutes the leader's values, either implicit or explicit values. Espoused values is what we refer to at times. And also the leader's principles. And most importantly, the leader's actions. In other words, are those values, implicit or explicit, congruent with the leader's behavior? That's what followers are going to pay attention to. And that leads us to the second component, which is the health of the contract or the delivery of the deal. And that's the evaluation, the assessment that followers make about the leader's behavior. And they compare notes in terms of that's what the leader said that we're going to deliver, that was the promise, but that's what actually are delivering. And it has 3 components. The first one is what we call the fulfillment of expectations. In other words, followers have created a number of expectations about the leader. And after some time, they're going to make an assessment. They're going to judge whether those expectations have been met or not. The second one is the levels of trust. In other words, followers will be asking themselves, is this leader consistent with what he's saying and what he's actually doing? Does the leader come across as being sincere? Does he come across as being honest? Does she come across as being a person that is competent, that delivers what it says? Is that person, he or she, reliable in all his deeds? That's what trust is all about. And the third one is about fairness. Is that leader a person that makes decisions in a fair manner? Does it take into account issues around equity? Or does it seem to be displaying favoritisms in terms of making decisions? So if we put those 3 elements together, the fulfillment of expectations, the levels of trust and fairness, what we have is the health of the contract. And that determines the leader's credibility, integrity, and character. So that's the second component of the leadership psychological contract. This level of the health of the contract then will determine the third component, which is the consequences of the contract. And the consequences of the contract has 4 key components. The first component is commitment. And by commitment, I mean something very specific. In fact, we refer to it as effective commitment because it's got an affective and emotional component. It refers to the levels of emotional connection of followers to the leader or to the team or to the cause, to the leader's cause. So it's an emotional anchor. The next one is satisfaction, which refers to the levels of satisfaction, how satisfied, how content those followers working with that particular leader in that particular team. So again, is also an emotional component. In turn, this determines the next two elements, which are about action. The first one is what we call discretionary efforts. Discretionary effort is about the degree to which followers, team members, are prepared to go beyond the call of duty, are prepared to do what we usually call the extra mile. Not because somebody's asking them to do that, but because that's what they want to do. They're so strongly emotionally connected to the leader and to the team and to the cause that voluntarily they do whatever it takes to get things done. And the other component, the fourth component, is what we call innovation. And in this context, innovation refers to the ability and adaptability to change. Innovation within this context of this model is about creative thinking, is about welcoming new ideas, is about accepting new ideas, is about being receptive to new ideas, is about championing new ideas, is about being willing to try new things, new ways of doing things. So when you put those four key elements together, the commitment, the satisfaction, the discretionary effort, and innovation, then is when you get those extraordinary outcomes. Then is when you can truly say that those individuals are ready to move mountains. So the first three components of the health are cognitive variables. People make an assessment about the behavior of the leader to arrive, and that's how it gets measured. The next two, which I said are mediating variables, are emotional components, emotional variables. And the last two are behavioral components, are behavioral variables. It's what actually people do. What I find interesting very much in the business world is that everybody likes those last two, but people don't think about what's required in terms of building that, getting there. Yes, sir.
Will that extend to political environment? Because there are many politicians that have been elected to office without any of those criteria.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you. Absolutely, absolutely. And I think what we are proposing, I mean, Grabiel actually has helped me to contextualize this model. It used to be just in the business context, because that's where most of my work is based. But Grabiel has helped me to put into a wider context, politics, anywhere, any leader that is expected to act with integrity, to be there for the constituency, can be measured by those critical variables. And if those scores are high, our proposition is that if the scores are high, if the health of the contract is high, fulfillment of expectations, high levels of trust and fairness, people will deliver whatever is required, will move mountains. And just think about, leaders that have been there, people like Gandhi and Luther King, if you would have asked those constituencies how people would have scored those constructs. Okay, thank you.